There. Alright, let's try this again. Right, come on. Okay. I'm at 20 pounds. 50 pounds.
I'm attempting to create a fully 3D printed scissors lift shoe. Shoes that can lift me up a couple of inches, but they have to be fully 3D printed. And to start, I'm limiting myself to just PLA. PLA is the most common plastic in 3D printing and it's so easy to use. But I feel it gets a bad name for practical prints. To be clear, I have no background in material engineering or even engineering. Everything I do here is self-taught. So I could be completely wrong, but let's give it a go. So how did this idea start? Well, I love 3D printing and I was running an after-school program with kids around 3D printing and created a scissors toy as an example project. From there I thought, hey, I can make this into a mini scissors lift. How hard would that be? So I tried it and created it. And then I said, wait a second, let's turn these into shoes. Now, full disclosure, after I came up with this, I looked on the internet and Colin Furs has created scissors lift shoes as well. However, his were metal and hydraulic. He's an amazing YouTuber. Check out his channel. And these are going to be fully 3D printed. No metal parts, no screws. That's the dream. The goal of this initial design was just to get a baseline to see how much weight it could hold. As you can see, one of the parts got messed up, but the print took 4 hours and I printed some extra parts, so I was able to salvage this and assemble this initial design. There are 3 main parts of this design. The part here is the base, which holds a screw, which is the drive that will lift and lower the whole scissors lift. The next component is the scissors part. And for this first design, it uses these snap pegs, as you can see, to assemble together. Now that we have the scissors part working, it's time to assemble it to the base and put on the top. For this original design, I decided to use a 3D printed clip to keep the pegs from moving around. Alright, now I just have to attach the top the same way using the clips. And we have our first version. Let's test it out.
Try this one.
So for this initial test, we used bricks raised at max height. We just want to see how much weight it could hold at max height. Not what it could lift, just hold. So this version really could hold 6 bricks. But it didn't break straight down. It broke from the twist.
So what snap? You see here, this peg popped out. Oh yeah, one of the pegs snapped.
I really wanted to see what would happen if it broke straight down, because I know the pegs were a weak point and needed to change. But what else was a weak point? Luckily, I had the second version, and this one also held 6 bricks, but it broke straight down and it showed me some interesting things. One, the crack was at the base, where the screw went in. So that was a real pressure point I needed to reinforce. And 2, when it fell down, the actual screw broke too. So I needed to reinforce that. So what I learned is I was going to need to be able to change the size and thickness of different parts of this scissors lift to test where the weak points are. And the best way to do that is with a parametric design. What is a parametric design, you ask? Here's an example of a simple parametric design. I have a link and I have a peg. And everything in this design is calculated based off of these variables over here. For example, if I change link width from 10 millimeters to 20 millimeters, the whole model recalculates and updates. You're probably thinking that would have been easy to do without a variable. And that is true, changing something simple like that. However, what if I change the peg diameter, this thing? That means that I have to update the peg diameter as well as the hole diameter. And if I change this variable, the whole model recalculates and updates all the peg diameters and all the holes. That's the real power of a parametric design. Here is my updated design for the scissors lift. I made it parametric, which means I have a table of variables here that I can change, and this model will update. But I want to take the time now to explain some of the changes I made and some of the things I think about when I'm designing for 3D printing. First, let's talk about the changes. In the previous design, we had these pegs that clipped and kept the links together. That was a weak point, and I couldn't make them thicker or bigger because then I wouldn't be able to put them together. So I opted for the 3D printed threads and 3D printed nuts. Remember, I'm trying to keep this all 3D printed. That way I can control parametrically how thick I want this as I do different tests. The other big change is I made everything bigger and everything thicker. Remember, there was a breakpoint down here. So this base here is now double the thickness, and there's a big circle here to help distribute the force over a larger surface area so it doesn't crack at one point. Now, when I'm designing in 3D, one of the important things I have to think about is, one, how am I going to orient this when I 3D print it to make it strong and to require the least amount of supports? And two, how am I going to assemble it together? Other thing I did is there is no full peg across the bottom, which would help with stability, but when you go down, it broke the screw last time. The other thing I want to show is this screw. When I first designed this, I had the screw going all the way across, like this. So the screw went all the way across, and I thought, this is great, it can't slide back and forth, because I've left some room. Great idea in theory. However, when I printed it, I realized very quickly there was no way to assemble that. Oops. I'd forgotten how to take into account assembly. Now it's updated where this blue part actually fits into here. If I turn this part, the screw transparent, you'll see that. Make transparent. You see there is a rectangular peg that fits into there. This allows me to assemble it correctly. Now, when 3D printing, you also have to think, does it need to be separate parts or not? Could I actually have used this version and just printed this blue base and the screw all as one part? I could have in theory. There might have been a little more friction here with parts to break up. However, the drawback to that, especially in the prototyping phase, if you do that, then anytime I made a change to the screw, I'd have to print the entire base as well. That wastes time and plastic. So I like making it so it can assemble, so I can save time with printing and iterate faster. So I have my design, I can show that it works in theory, but let's print it, assemble it together, and see how stable it is in reality. After hours of 3D printing, all the parts were ready to assemble. Here I'm assembling the scissors, the bottom part that doesn't have the full peg going through. And I can tell you there's nothing more satisfying when you get those tolerances correct on those 3D printed threads. Okay, maybe I was wrong. The snap fit together is also pretty satisfying as well. The nut design versus that peg design in the original was so much better. It offers so much flexibility with assembling. I'm really loving it.
Feels a little loose. You'll see there's a bunch of space there, and 3D print some washers to fill that up. Now that we have the scissors, let's work on the base. Supports.
You'll notice the screw here is multicolor, blue and white. This is not a feature, this is not relevant. The only reason this part and many of my other parts you'll see are multiple colors is because I was using up the ends of rolls of different filament for this prototyping phase. Kinda looks cool, but not necessary. Just wanted to save some filament. Screw fits on perfectly. You'll notice there's a nut in front there to keep the screw from going back and forth. I added spacers in between everything at these connection points to make sure it was more stable and less wobbly in the back and forth direction. Those pegs actually screw in now to the middle piece. Oops, I tried to screw it in too tight. and it broke. Something to be aware of and maybe a potential weak point. I'm now attaching the scissors lift to the base at the pivot point, the part that doesn't slide. And I was super glad I printed extra spacers because I realized my measurements were off. The scissors lifts, let's attach that top. So the top is attached very similarly to how the base is attached to the scissors. I designed and 3D printed a quick handle to make it easier to lift. Awesome! It goes down and it goes back up. Now, as I do this, I'm noticing there's a lot of wiggle room, and that's a little bit of a concern for me. But look at that size difference. It's chunky. Go big or go home. Let's test this. So I was quite optimistic about this test and definitely thought it would hold more than the last one. But to my disappointment, at 7 bricks, that's only one more brick, it snapped. Okay, we need to talk. That was a disappointment. I was not expecting that to perform so poorly. Only one more brick than this much smaller version after all that work in CAD. So I was initially pretty frustrated, disappointed, and wasn't sure what the reason was. All too often on these YouTube videos, I think we skate over the fact of the frustration, disappointment, and that we don't know what the issue is for a while. But I did figure it out. And honestly, it was just staring me right in the face. The part that broke on this test was the exact same part that broke when I was assembling it, right where the thread and the rod met. So why? Well, the reason why is the layer lines. It's a classic 3D printing mistake. When you're 3D printing, it forms all these layers. And where each layer meets is a weak point. So I thought I could get away with printing this vertically. Why did I want to print it vertically? Because I didn't want to deal with supports on the threads. Because I know threads can be messed up by supports. And I want you to notice also that the infill, I kept the standard grid with the 15%. So there was not much plastic on the inside. What did I change? I changed the orientation and the infill. First thing I did was rotate this 90 degrees. Then I added supports. I made sure only on build plate. Then I changed the infill. So under strength, I went to infill, and instead of 15%, I chose 50%. And instead of grid, I chose 3D honeycomb. So when I slice it, this is what it looks like. It has those supports, and the inside is this tight pack 3D honeycomb. And I did that for everything that had threads. So after 8 hours of 3D printing, I got the pieces with better layer lines and better infill, assembled it, and it was time to test again.
One, two, nervous, 3.
So here's the moment of truth. It held! It held! Now, as I kept on layering on the bricks, I noticed this thing was sinking further and further down. And I wasn't sure why at first. And then I looked at the back, and the back was bowing out a huge amount. However, it still held. It flexed, but held. So at 73 pounds, we ran out of bricks and I had to get like 2 weights.
Woohoo! There's still a gap. There's still a gap. There's still a gap, barely, but it's still there.
Oh, I heard something. I heard a snap.
So after I heard the snap, I was a little
Let's see
concerned.
if it pops back
I
up.
wanted to take off the weight and see if the thing popped back up.
In theory.
And it did. So now it was time to push it to the limit with my weight.
I just rest my leg on that. Roughly 20
We set it up with a scale so we
More
could
weight.
read exactly how much weight was on it
40 pounds.
when it broke.
6, 8. Alright, I'm gonna start lifting up. Did it touch? I felt it touch. It didn't
And to
break.
my amazement, it held with my entire weight on it.
Wow. Yeah,
Now,
it's touching.
part of the reason is I think the back
Yeah.
corner was touching,
It says it's 125.
and that's why it's held. So we need to push this limit and actually break it.
But it springs back up. It's the
It was in
base
this
one,
human trial
right?
that I noticed the base really warping in the back.
Alright, we're lifting it up more. Can you see it now? So it's higher, Alright, let's try this again. Right, come on. Okay. I'm at 20 pounds. No, I can hold that. More pressure. 50 pounds. I feel it going down. Alright, I'm gonna start putting weight. I'm gonna use you to support me. Down, and there we go. That's where I thought it would go. Alright.
Well, this video is getting long. I've learned a lot. So this project is going to be broken into multiple videos. And the key thing here is that the base needs to be strong enough and not flex too much. So I'm going to work on redesigning the base and maybe changing the print settings so that it's stronger, doesn't flex, and doesn't break. If you're interested in that, make sure you subscribe and ring that bell so you can see when that part 2 of this project comes out. And remember, take the time to learn and create every day.